What's up everybody, Greg here with LensPro2Go, and earlier this week I put up a video talking about photographing food and how to light it, what props to get, how to set it up, and I also said that I would talk about my camera gear and camera settings. So that's what this video is going to be talking about. If you haven't seen that other video, I'm going to link to it right up here, so go check that out. For that shoot, I was using the Fujifilm X-T2 with a 56mm f1.2 lens on it. It wasn't the ideal setup, but I really like the look of the Fuji cameras, so this is what I decided to shoot with. Now let's talk about some settings. First up is ISO. Now you want to shoot with the lowest ISO possible, because as you raise up the ISO, obviously it gets grainier, but it also adds in some color noise, and that's going to change the color and look of the food that you're shooting. So I would recommend shooting at an 800 ISO or less. Most of the shots that I took were around 400 or 500. For the shutter speed, I like to have mine around 1/125th of a second. This is a good compromise between speed and letting a good amount of light in. The reason that you want speed, you might not think because it's food and it's not really moving around, but if you're holding your hand out like this and you're trying to get that overhead shot, you're gonna have some camera shake, and the 1/125th of a second will help solve some of that. The other reason is if you're shooting some action and somebody's pouring something or sprinkling something onto it, you want to be able to capture that action and not have motion blur. So you might even go up higher than 1/125th of a second in some cases. But if you have really steady hands or you're locked down on a tripod, you can go a lot slower than that, especially if nothing's moving in the frame. The last setting is Aperture, and I played around with mine between 2.8 and 5.6, but it really depends on what you're going for. Usually with overhead or top-down shots, I try to have a little bit deeper depth of field, so I'll go closer to like a 5.6, and then if I'm shooting on that 45-degree angle, I'll drop it to a 2.8, maybe a 2, depending on what I'm shooting. You really just need to play around with it and see what you like best. Something to keep in mind though is how you're actually exposing these shots. I really like the look between -1/3 and -2/3 of a stop underexposed. But if you're going for something a little bit brighter, you might want to have it 1/3 of a stop overexposed instead. Now you don't need a crazy high-end camera to do food photography. You can start with the camera that you already have. But if you're looking to upgrade, the one thing that I think is really important in doing food photography is having a camera that has a high megapixel count so you can really capture all of the detail in the food. If it's just going to be going up on Instagram or some other social media, you can get away with having lower resolution, but if you're shooting for magazines or any type of print, you're definitely going to want to get the best quality possible, and these cameras are going to help you get that. For Sony shooters, I would recommend the A7rII. For Canon, the 5D SR, Nikon, the D850, and if you want to go for a little bit higher resolution, the medium format Fujifilm GFX 50S is a fantastic option. Now, depending on what you're shooting, your lens selection can range greatly. If you're shooting large table spreads or restaurant interiors, you're probably going to want something on the wider end and most likely a zoom, especially if you haven't been to the location before and you don't know what to expect. For this type of shot, I would recommend the 16-35 G Master lens for the A7R II, the 17-40 or the 16-35 for the 5D SR, the 16-35 for the Nikon D850, and for the Fuji, the 32-64mm. If you're shooting smaller spreads, so not the full table, but you still have a couple of plates, you'll probably want to get something in the mid-range around a 50mm. If you want to have the flexibility, all of these systems have a really solid 24-70 2.8 option, which I'll just throw a link to in the description below if you guys want to check them out. But I think there's one lens that you should always have on a food shoot, and that's a macro lens. When you're shooting food, it can get a lot smaller than you think going into it, and you don't want to let a minimum focus distance stop you from getting a shot. So having a macro lens allows you to get super close to the action or to a tiny small detail on a food and let you get those shots. You don't want to rely on post and having to crop in and lose resolution because you couldn't get close enough to actually get the shot that you wanted to get. And they're really great to fill the frame with the food that you're shooting and get those mouth-watering shots that I know you want. Sadly, Sony doesn't currently have any G Master macros in their lineup, but they do have a 90mm and a 50mm. For Canon, I would recommend using the 100mm L lens with IS. Nikon has their 105G lens, and Fuji has their massive 120mm f4 macro lens, which should give you about the same focal length as those other ones. That's gonna wrap it up for today. Let's start a conversation down in the comments below. Let me know what your favorite gear is for photographing food. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I put up at least 2 videos every week, and I'll see you guys in the next one.